Good morning, devotees. Today we're having a very special guest. Most of you know he was Srila Prabhupada's servant. There you are.
Hari Krishna, glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hi, Jai Prabhu. I'm going to read a little bio of Hari Sauri Prabhu. Hari Sauri Prabhu was born in England, November 17th, 1950. In May of 1971, he emigrated to Australia, where on the second day of arrival, he met the members of a newly emerging Krishna conscious movement. Won't you say it's quite serendipitous? He was duly accepted as an initiated disciple of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada on April 9th, 1972 in Sydney. In August of 1975, he moved to the newly opened ISKCON Krishna Balaram Temple in Vrindavan, India, where he served as temple commander. In November of the same year, he joined Srila Prabhupada's personal entourage, remaining His Divine Grace servant for 16 months. In March of 1977, Srila Prabhupada appointed him as governing body commissioner for Australia, New Zealand, and Indonesia, a service he performed for over 7 years. During that period, he oversaw the growth of the ISKCON Society in the South Seas, from 4 temples and ashrams to 17, including 4 farming communities, 2 schools, and several restaurants. He was also instrumental in establishing branches of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust in Australia and Indonesia. In 1986, he began the work of transforming the diary he kept while traveling with Srila Prabhupada into a book. After working as managing editor of Bhakti Godhead magazine, the Krishna Consciousness Movement's spiritual periodical, for a year in 1990, he dedicated his full time to his own writing. Since 1996, he and his wife and daughter, his wife Shitala, have been based at ISKCON's world headquarters in Sri Mayapur Dham, West Bengal, where he served for 4 years as head of the child protection team and 2 years as co-director. He's currently completing the remaining volumes of A Transcendental Diary. Wait a second, is this dated? You're not done?
And there should be something more. I don't, maybe I sent the wrong text, but is that all? Is that what everything you have?
That's everything I have.
Okay, well, I'll just add to that in 2009, I co-founded with Pranava Prabhu from Sweden, the Bhaktivedanta Research Center in Calcutta. We have about 18,000 works there, including 3,000 items that were originally part of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's personal library. So I just recently retired due to some health issues, but I'm continuing on with the Transcendental Diary series. And in fact, today what I was going to do was actually read some of the new material that has not yet been published, if that's all right with you guys.
It's more than all right. You take it away and run with it.
So how long have we got?
Well, how long can you speak without losing your voice?
Well, I usually go about an hour.
That's fine. An hour is okay. And if you feel inspired to continue, you're free to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice to see you again.
Likewise.
Okay, so on that note, I'll just bring up on my screen. This is the first chapter of what will be Transcendental Diary Volume 6. I've published 5 volumes so far. Last year, I published a separate diary that I was keeping of Prabhupada's last 6 weeks in Vrindavan from beginning of October to the middle of November when he left us. So that book has been published. I think it's been fairly well received. And now what I'm going to read today is Prabhupada's visit to Hyderabad well, not Hyderabad actually, a place called Wardha, which is north of Hyderabad. And we'll see how far we get with that. Okay, so this will be chapter 2 in volume 6, Wardha, Maharashtra. So Prabhupada had been invited to attend what they call the Gita Pratishthan meeting. It had been organized by some very wealthy people in India, some followers of Gandhi, and Prabhupada is one of the leading exponents of Bhagavad Gita in the world, was invited to attend that conference. Gita Pratishthan means it's a society for promoting the Bhagavad Gita. So, of course, nobody was more efficient at doing that than Srila Prabhupada. So we had 2 weeks in December at the Hyderabad farm, where Prabhupada gave some indication how to implement the Varnashram system. He very much wanted that. We had been in, Vrindavan for 3 months to the end of November. In early December 76, we went to Delhi and then flew down to Hyderabad. And as Prabhupada was leaving Vrindavan, he said, now we're going to start a new phase of this movement. So Jagadish Prabhu was his secretary then. So he asked him, what's that, Srila Prabhupada? And Prabhupada said, Varnashram. So, okay, so we went down to Hyderabad. We stayed for a few days at the city center there, where Prabhupada had actually opened a new temple in Janmashtami. That was August. And after a few days, he went out. He spent about 10 or 12 days at the farm there. And then on the night of December 17, 1976, we boarded a railway carriage, a train, to go up to Wardha. So December the 18th, 1976, lulled by the rock and rattle of the carriage, we slept comfortably as our train sped through the night to Wardha. We awoke around 5 o'clock to find Prabhupada already up, chanting on his beads. One by one, we filed out to brush our teeth and bathe, and then Prabhupada himself went out to wash. When he returned, we happily sat across from him, following his lead in chanting our Gayatri mantras. Then, asking for his kartals, he softly began to chant the Mangala Charana prayers, beginning with Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakya and Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Uttapada Kamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha. At first, he sang solo, and then when he began the Sri Sri Govashtakam, the prayers glorifying the spiritual master, he indicated for us to join in. He led, and the three of us responded. The other two, of course, Jagadish Prabhu, and I think Hansa Dutta was the other one. So we've, three of us responded, first with the prayers to the spiritual master, then the Panchatattva, and then Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And finally, with Kirtana Gana Nota, Kirtana Gana Nartana Paro, from the Sri Sri Sad Goswami Ashtakam. And for us, it was very exciting, at least it was for me. I've been with Prabhupada about just over a year at this point, or just on a year. And it was a rare and sublime moment of intimacy, having Srila Prabhupada not only sitting just three feet away from us as we sang our daily prayers of appreciation and glorification of him, but also having him lead us in doing so. It struck struck me that just as we were meditating on him as the object of our affection and gratitude, so also was he deeply absorbed in meditating on his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. It deepened my sense of connection with the Guru Parampara. Not minding that he had an audience of only 3, Prabhupada then gave a brief class on Srimad Bhagavatam 7.1.1. The class complete, he eased back on his seat and we all chanted on our beads until our 8:25 a.m. arrival in Wardha. As our train eased to a halt, Prabhupada was gratified to see a large group of our Bombay devotees and local people gathered on the platform, engaged in an enthusiastic kirtan in anticipation of his arrival. He stepped down from the carriage to be happily and reverentially received by Mr. Ram Krishna Bajaj, the wealthy industrialist who has convened the event, and his brother-in-law, Sriman Narayan, a former governor of Gujarat and the present president of the Gita Pratishthan. So these are very big men, politics, businessmen. Bajaj means anybody who's been to India, you can see Bajaj scooters and motorcycles, Bajaj fans and all kinds of other electronic goods. So that man, the owner of that, he was one of the organizers and he personally came to receive Prabhupada at the railway station. Prabhupada was led to an open horse-drawn carriage, which he boarded with Hansadutta Maharaj and myself, and was taken in procession to the town, the kirtan party preceding. Although the route was only a couple of miles long, we took more than an hour and a quarter to traverse it, stopping frequently as people came out of their houses to offer respects, with small trays arranged with ghee lamp, flowers, kumkum powder, and a few grains of uncooked rice. The excited and reverential townsfolk came forward to mount the side of the carriage, dot the center of Prabhupada's forehead with the kumkum and rice, wave their lamps toward him, and deposit the flowers and a few paisa on his lap as a token of their veneration. So this is the traditional Indian manner of offering worshipful respect to a great personality and just befitting the arrival of his divine grace. Excuse my throat's a bit thick today. So at the town center, we drew slowly down the main street, still heralded by the kirtan party. Thousands of people appeared on both sides, enthusiastically showering down flowers and petals from balconies and rooftops to honor Krishna's pure devotee and the foreign bhaktas. Srila Prabhupada received their accolades with humble disposition, the palms of his hands pressed together in pranam, as eager onlookers clamored to garland him. It was a wonderful spectacle and experience. Finally, we stopped outside a Lakshmi Narayan temple on Bagdaraj Road, which operates under the auspices of the Bajaj family. The two-story mandir is not an elaborate monument, but though a little bigger than a small residential apartment block, it became famous in India as the first temple to allow the lower castes, or Harijans, as Gandhi renamed them, the full rights of access in 1928. The temple was packed as Prabhupada entered first through the arch of the gatehouse and then into the temple proper. He was pleased to see many more of his disciples, including Jayapataka Swami, Gurudas Swami, Gopal Krishna Prabhu, and Giriraj Prabhu. Prabhupada moved forward to the deity room to offer his obeisances to the 4-foot-tall white marble presiding deities of Sri Sri Lakshmi Narayan, who stood on a waist-height marble altar. Though not dressed elaborately by ISKCON standards, the resplendent and majestic four-armed Lord and his eternal consort looked well cared for. After receiving Charanamrita, Prabhupada was invited to sit to the side of the temple room in a large armchair like Vyasa. For the next half hour, he happily held court, surrounded by his disciples, while Hansadutta Maharaj led us in kirtan, much to the delight and amazement of hundreds of locals. Prabhupada was very pleased with the whole reception. Finally, it was time to go by car to our lodgings at Bajaj Wadi, the old residence of Jamunalal Bajaj, built in the early 1930s. So this was like a guest house. Even with its relatively small population, about 1 lakh or 100,000 people, Wada had been one of the main centers of resistance to British rule. M.K. Gandhi and the leaders of the Indian National Congress Party had gathered here to plan their political strategies in the fight for independence from the British Raj. The Congress leaders had been housed in the 2-story guest house at the back of the land, and it was to this same building, glistening white in the sunshine, that Srila Prabhupada was brought. He has been assigned a room formerly used by the first president of India, Rajendra Prasad. Though spacious and pleasant, it is plain, with traditional whitewashed walls, stone floor, and glass windows with wooden shutters and metal bars. And it is furnished simply with a metal frame bed, a chair, and a small table. There is also a small adjoining kitchen. The guest house, about 300 meters back from the roadside entrance, is neither elaborate nor opulent, but it's well maintained, clean, and quite large, with a central courtyard and narrow inner veranda dotted with potted plants. All our devotees are able to stay within its precincts, as well as guests from other spiritual groups who have also been invited for the meeting. Prabhupada settled in quickly, Ramakrishna Bajaj and his wife accompanying him inside to make sure that he was comfortably situated. Prabhupada liked the simple, unpretentious surroundings, and based on his respectful reception, he appears optimistic about the upcoming meeting. Mr. Bajaj is one of India's leading Gandhian advocates, a philanthropist and moral light amongst the business community. In his mid-50s, he is largely defined by his upbringing in the midst of the freedom movement. His father, Jamunalal Bajaj, was one of Gandhi's great supporters, and Ramakrishna was brought up under Gandhi and Vinababave's personal guidance. He did 3 years in jail in support of his country's political struggle, and then after the death of his elder brother, Kamal Nayan, he became the head of the Bajaj Group. Among other things, the company makes a wide range of electrical products, such as fans, motor rickshaws, motorcycles, and scooters. Sriman Narayan, in his mid-60s, is married to Mr. Bajaj's sister, Madalasa, and apart from his political credentials, he is the author of several books on Gandhi and Vinababave and their philosophies. Srila Prabhupada has come here because these men have some influence in India still. They are the Shrestas that Srila Prabhupada always said should take up the propagation of the message of the Bhagavad Gita. If he can convince them to become serious about spreading the Bhagavad Gita as it is, they can be a great help to the cause of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Otherwise, he told us, a devotee has no business mixing with such politically and industrially minded men. Prabhupada took his massage at his usual time on a small porch leading directly off his room to the side of the house, and his lunch was prepared by Shruti Rupa Dasi, the wife of Calcutta Temple President Abhiram Prabhu. Although he has told us that he will accept the hospitality of his hosts, Prabhupada called Shruti Rupa in during his massage and discussed in detail what she should cook and with what spices. His digestion is delicate and good quality prasadam is crucial for maintaining his health. Just excuse me 1 second, I have to drink something here. My voice is cracking up. Just be 1 minute.
I'll take this moment to encourage the devotees to think of some questions at the end of his reading and talk. Just please write them down so you don't forget them.
Okay, I hope that will do it. So actually, Shruti Rupa, some years ago, sent me a copy of a cooking diary that she was maintaining when she was traveling with the party. She was quite a good cook herself, and Prabhupada would call her in every morning, tell her the food, the preparations that they should make for his lunch, and they would go off and cook it. Palika also was another one who was trained by Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada's health at this point in his sojourn with us, he suffered from very weak or very, very bad digestion. So whatever he ate was spiced in certain ways to help improve his digestive ability. If you can't digest things, then it's as good as poison. So Prabhupada was very keen on that. And Shruti Rupa has very graciously given me a copy of her diary notes, where she would write down all the instructions about cooking that Prabhupada would give them. So at the town center, we drove, wait a minute. Sorry, I've lost my spot. There we go. Right, so we're at the hotel. Ramakrishna Bajaj and Sriman Narayan, they are the Shrestas that Srila Prabhupada always said should take up the propagation of the message of the Bhagavad Gita. If he can convince them to become serious about spreading the Bhagavad Gita as it is, then they can be a great help to the cause of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Otherwise, he told us, a devotee has no business mixing with such politically and industrially minded persons. So I had his lunch. After a short rest, Prabhupada rode by car to the first of several programs arranged for him by Giriraj Prabhu in conjunction with the Gita Pratishthan organizers. When we arrived at the local girls' college, we were pleasantly surprised by a reception of about 400 students and their teachers in the main assembly hall. Mounting a seat that had been placed on a small stage, Prabhupada received pranams and garlands from teachers and leading students. After a short introduction by the organizers, he led us in kirtan and then addressed his attentive audience for about 50 minutes. His hosts had requested that he speak in Hindi, but Prabhupada gave his address in English so that his disciples could also benefit from the talk. Immediately after leaving the college, Prabhupada traveled to Paramdam Ashram, which is the place of Vinabababe in Pune, a village about 5 miles north of Wardha. Bhave is regarded as the spiritual successor of Gandhi, and he became prominent in his own right in the 1950s for his land reform movement. Traveling by foot all over India for 13 years, he inspired landowners to give gifts of several million acres of land, which were redistributed to poor villages. He established the Paramdama Ashram on the banks of the River Dam in the late 1930s, and eventually he retired there in 1970. He observed Mauna Brat for 1 year, and in 1975, he has been heading up a campaign of Gandhi-style fasting to protest the slaughter of cows. He is 1 year older than Srila Prabhupada, but stone deaf, and any visitors have to write notes to communicate with him. Prabhupada had asked Jagadish Prabhu to bring along the notes that he had prepared in Hyderabad. So just a side note there, this Vinabababe, as I said, he was a contemporary of Gandhi's, one of his leading group. And after Gandhi's disappearance from the scene, he took up this idea of redistribution of land. One of the main things in the Indian independence movement was that the zamindars who owned huge amounts of land would be forced to give up their ownership, and the land was redistributed to the farmers and the poor people that actually worked the land. So in India, nobody is allowed to have more than 25 acres of land without getting special permission from the government. So that was Vinabababe's main thing for about 13 years, walking around India and persuading zamindars to give up their land and redistribute it to the farming class. So also we had been informed prior to coming to Wardha that Vinabababe was stone deaf, and so Prabhupada spent 2 weeks when we were at the Hyderabad farm putting together a document which was based on Bhagavad Gita, which he was going to present to the people that came to this Gita Pratishthan meeting. So along with a small group of our devotees, Prabhupada was taken on a quick tour of the 10-acre ashram before the meeting. The place is well appointed, with many buildings and good but simple facilities for its nearly 30 residents. This is the ashram of Vinabababe. Here and there, small alcoves house various murtis, including a wooden statue of Christ holding a flute, symbolizing the integration of religion. Another of Lord Vishnu, carved from black stone, had been found in the bed of the river and donated to the ashram by Jamalal Bajaj in the 1930s. Several other murtis, unearthed when the foundations were dug, are displayed as historical curiosities. The ashram is in fact built on the site of an ancient temple said to date back about 1500 years. It contains a large central garden, and the residents also maintain a goshala with only local cows, since foreign cows and crossbreeds often cannot take the heat. The local breed produces less milk, but provides good working bullocks. So they had their own goshala there, quite a big one. After our brief tour, Srila Prabhupada was brought into a room on the riverside of the ashram for his meeting with Vinabababe. With its stone floor, and woven cane-covered ceiling, and cooled by the breeze from the river, the venue was quite pleasant. Seated on a wooden bed, his slight frame supported by horizontal bars on the window behind him, Bhave greeted Srila Prabhupada warmly. He is the inspiration for the Gita Pratishthan and the chief influence of Ramakrishna Bajaj and other Gandhians. Ramakrishna Bajaj had already given Bhave a written report about Prabhupada and ISKCON, and as he sat, he was shown the photos of our temples and our preaching activities. Amidst his largely female following, Bhave nodded his head in appreciation and said in Hindi, "Bahut acha karam kar rahe." Very good work is being done. The preliminaries completed, Srila Prabhupada attempted to engage Bhave in a meaningful exchange. He stressed that the Gita should be preached especially to the leaders of society, and explained that for people in general, the chanting of the holy name should be the main activity. Bhave, however, felt that the Gita should be taught to all persons. He evidently knew something of Lord Chaitanya and his philosophy, and he made some remarks in Hindi about Trinadapi Sunichina and Lord Chaitanya's movement. But Prabhupada saw immediately that due to Bhave's hearing impairment, the two would not be able to carry on much of a philosophical discussion. So he did not reference the notes that Jagadish had brought with us. Their exchange was pleasant enough, but brief. Bhave concluding with a good-humored remark that since Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had lived for 48 years, Srila Prabhupada should live for 96 to continue his work. Prabhupada smiled and showed Bhave one or two of his books, bringing the short get-together to a close. Back in his room at the Bajaj Wadi, Prabhupada said that Bhave is a pious man, but not a devotee. He had started many programs for social reform and welfare, but has had little success in real terms. And for all their quoting of the Gita, there was not one single picture or deity of Krishna in the whole place. They're all impersonalists, and actually the atmosphere at the ashram was quite dry. So that we had a tour around the first day of arrival there. Prabhupada appreciated these people, but as we noted there, 100% they're all Mayavadis. That came up to be a factor later on in the next day. But so as Prabhupada was saying in his room, Jayapataka Swami came to see Prabhupada in the early evening and delivered a positive report on Mayapur. Our boat, the Nitai Padakamala, is going out regularly with the devotees selling thousands of Gita Gans. Gita Gan was a small book that Prabhupada actually put together. He wrote all of the verses of the Bhagavad Gita in a kind of rhyming fashion. And Prabhupada said he wrote it in such a way that no one could make a mistake as to its real meaning. So our men are becoming well known and popular in all the villages of Bengal, and many visitors are coming regularly to our temple. Of course, now the Mayapur situation is much different. At this time when Prabhupada was there, we only had just that one 4-story building, the Lotus building, and the long building, and that was it. Nowadays, of course, we got a city. But the preaching was going on, and Prabhupada was extremely pleased with their progress, although no further developments had taken place on our land acquisition application. So Prabhupada had previously told the devotees to apply for an exemption to the Land Ceiling Act and get at least 300 acres for our Mayapur scheme. unfortunately, whilst we were making that application, the Communist Party came into power at the beginning of 1977, and everything was stopped until about 2 years ago, when the Communist Party were thrown out and the local party, Trinamool, came to power. They're very friendly to ISKCON. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, they gave a special exemption for the development of Mayapur and allowed ISKCON in Mayapur to have 700 acres of land so that we could expand and develop Prabhupada's idea of Mayapur. So Prabhupada was extremely pleased with their progress, although no further developments have taken place. Prabhupada called in the leading devotees and spoke to them about the importance of book distribution in India. He told them that it doesn't even matter if we don't make any profit, as long as we can cover the costs and the books go out. He stressed to Gopal Krishna Prabhu his policy of 50% of the profits going to printing more books and 50% going to temple construction. India is beginning to awaken to the Hare Krishna movement, and Prabhupada is keen that both aspects of ISKCON's preaching work should be firmly established. So temples and books. So far, much of the preaching has been through life memberships, but now the potential to sell books is beginning to show. Gopal Krishna agreed, but pleaded for more time to come to the 50% standard. He explained that he needed to reinvest the money from book sales so that he could print new titles, but he felt that he could follow the standard after some time. Prabhupada consented. He is happy with Gopal's efforts and said that when we become enthusiastic, he becomes enthusiastic as well. So that was the beginning, that 76, 77, Prabhupada began to seriously distribute his books in India, in Hindi, Gujarati, and other languages. And Gopal Krishna Maharaj, who was a married man at this time, he was the manager of the BBT in Bombay. And so a good deal of his efforts were dedicated to book distribution and printing new titles. Prabhupada was very pleased with that. So about 8 p.m., Prabhupada went out for another program, this time at the Lakshmi Narayan Mandir. A small pandal had been set up in an open courtyard belonging to the United Western Bank, immediately adjacent to the temple. A crowd of about 1,500 gathered to hear Prabhupada's hour-long lecture, and after his departure, the devotees showed films of ISKCON's preaching around the world. It had been a busy and eventful day for His Divine Grace, and by the time he retired for his evening massage and rest, it was late in the night. December 19, 1976, Prabhupada took a brief walk around the grounds of a local school this morning. He said little, being content to exercise and chant japa. Basu Ghosh Prabhu, who came after a week of preaching in nearby Nagpur, began to voice some negative comments about Gandhi's philosophy. But even in our small group, Prabhupada silenced him, saying, "Don't criticize Gandhi here. This is his place. They will not understand." So he always had that sensibility of who he was preaching to and what to be said. So today was the first day of the scheduled Pratishthan meeting. After breakfast, we were driven out in a convoy to Pune for the inauguration at Paramdharma Ashram. The meeting was held in an unadorned but large hall, about 60 by 20 feet. Its roof simply corrugated asbestos on a steel frame. Representatives of a variety of spiritual and pseudo-spiritual groups, influential businessmen, and ex-politicians, along with other observers numbering about 200, were already sitting on mats on the floor before a small stage erected at one end. Srila Prabhupada entered, and as one of the three keynote speakers, he was led to the stage to occupy an asana alongside of Vinabababe and Swami Chidananda from the Divine Life Society. Chidananda is also staying at Bajajwadi in a room next to Prabhupada's, and he traveled in the same car with Prabhupada to the venue. They had met once before in the West. Before speaking, the meeting commenced with the chanting of the Vishnu Sahasranam, the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu, by a large group of young women, all disciples of Bhave. It added a nice spiritual touch, and it took about 20 minutes. Then Ramakrishna Bajaj got up and said a few introductory words, followed by Sriman Narayan. Vinabababe, appearing quite frail, his head covered by a green corduroy hat with large ear flaps and a prominent peak, and his eyes shielded with dark glasses, then began his opening address. Sitting in the middle of the stage, he spoke for about 15 minutes, mainly asking people to live by the tenets of the Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada spoke next. He took full advantage of the opportunity. Speaking in Hindi, he launched into a strong assertion that the true purpose of the Gita and an equally strong, he launched into a strong assertion of the true purpose of the Gita and an equally strong condemnation of impersonalism, the idea that you can follow the Gita without worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Although I couldn't understand the language of what he said, the meaning was clear. He openly condemned the philosophy of Yatamat Tatapat. Many paths lead to one goal. And he condemned it as nonsense, making quite a few people in the hall not a little uncomfortable. But he was not concerned with people's feelings. He was concerned that the true message of the Gita, that of Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of absolute truth, and that all living beings are his eternal, subordinate servants, be properly stated from the very beginning. Otherwise, as he has already expressed, this pratishthan will be useless and ineffective, having failed to invoke the Lord's mercy and blessings. So for just under an hour, he delivered an urgent and powerful adjuration to all the persons present to adhere to the Gita's true purpose. When he concluded, it was almost time for the end of the first session. Swami Chidananda was the last speaker. Another Mayavadi, he was visibly put out by Prabhupada's address, and especially by his having taken up almost all the remaining time. So Bhave spoke, Prabhupada spoke, but he didn't leave any time left over for, practically speaking, for Chidananda to speak. Chidananda was very annoyed, but he couldn't show it in public. So he started off sarcastically, saying in English, "I won't speak very long and keep you, as there is very little time left now, and there may be others who wish to speak." Because he knew full well that there weren't any others. But Prabhupada did not respond. He simply sat without the slightest concern, serenely fingering his japamala. At 12:15, after just a few minutes, Chidananda had to stop and the meeting ended. We returned in the car to the guest house. Srila Prabhupada, Chidananda, and another man sitting together in the back, Jagadish and myself up front with the driver. As we traveled back to Bajajwadi, Chidananda, sitting in the middle, launched into an elaborate and passionate tribute of Bhave, describing his plans for spreading the net message of Gita to the masses, and his latest attempts in social reform through what he called Women's Power Awakening, a kind of Gandhian women's liberation movement. Bhave Chidananda declared enthusiastically, understood that love, compassion, and sensitivity were needed to change the world. Because all these qualities are naturally found in women, he said, Bhave therefore had a program to train 16 to 20-year-old women in his ashram. Over a 7-year period, they learned to chant Sanskrit and the Vishnu Sahasranam and are trained in Shastra, in the principles of cleanliness, family life, etc. They then choose a district in India where they will work. They learn the local language, and at the end of the 7 years, they have to travel to that place on foot. On arrival, they're supposed to go from one village to the next, organizing women into groups and teaching them by personal example how to be clean, run their families, and so forth. Bhave's idea is that if there is a good atmosphere at home, the men will naturally become pacified and thus peace in society will prevail. It is a laudable enough endeavor, but completely mundane, hardly the real essence of the teachings of the Gita, as Prabhupada pointed out. While Chidananda was speaking, Prabhupada, on his left, had mostly been gazing out of the window with obvious disinterest. So Prabhupada was on the left side, Chidananda was in the middle, and then the other guy was there on the right side. So Prabhupada was just looking out the window, ignoring Chidananda. But he felt slighted at the meeting by not being given time to speak. He was now, while we were in the car, going to force us to hear what he had to say. So at first he pointed out, so Prabhupada was looking out of the window of the car with obvious disinterest. At first, he had pointed out that the Gita was actually for the leaders of human society, and that only if they took it seriously could society be changed for the good. But Chidananda wouldn't listen and was determined to have his say. Finally, as Chidananda wound down a bit, Prabhupada turned to him and said, "The thing is, you can imagine any plan you like, but the fact is, Sri Shudra Dvijabandhunam, these are less intelligent class of human beings, and they cannot preach Bhagavad Gita. Of course, if the women are devotees, then it is different." So he was referring to this scheme of Bhaves to recruit young girls and train them up. Prabhupada said it's all nonsense, except if they're devotees, then that's different. Chidananda, having already been affronted in the assembly hall, replied cuttingly, "Well, of course, the masses are less intelligent, so the path of devotion is naturally the only way for them. Because they have no knowledge, they can only be engaged in bhakti." So it was the classic envious accusation that the Mayavadis impute upon the devotees. The same criticism that Prakashananda Saraswati had leveled at Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu nearly 500 years ago, that bhakti is only for the less intelligent, and when one becomes a little more intelligent, he engages in speculative studies of the Vedanta Sutra. So we were hearing it right from the Mayavadi's mouth, so to speak. So Prabhupada, now with a great deal of labored patience, replied, "I have already explained that the Gita is for the Raja Rishi, the leaders of society, who are also great saintly persons." But Chidananda simply closed his ears and would not allow Prabhupada to continue. He was determined to be heard and to hear his own voice. Having been denied the opportunity to speak at the meeting, he now imposed himself on the rest of us with his praise of the non-devotees. Prabhupada simply turned away to look out the window again, no longer bothering to engage him in conversation or even to listen to him at all. It was quite obvious that he was uncomfortable even having to sit in the same car as the Mayavadis. So we got back, and then Prabhupada immediately took his massage. As Prabhupada took his massage, Jagadish Prabhu read him the day's mail. It was a lengthy report. Excuse me. There was a lengthy report from Tamal Krishna Maharaj on the ever-increasing book distribution of the Radha Damodar Traveling Sankirtan Party and their plans to expand and purchase new buses. Formerly, they were buying second-hand buses and converting them, but these used vehicles sometimes proved expensive to maintain. New vehicles, he feels, will be more reliable. They're building up for the Christmas marathon and are expecting record sales. Prabhupada was quite animated by the news. He sees great prospects unfolding in America due to the massive propagation of his books. He replied, "Your book distribution report is very encouraging. If I see our leaders are enthusiastic, it gives me more enthusiasm. Your suggestion to get new buses is good. I always recommend that. I don't like old vehicles. I think 100 buses are not sufficient for America. You propose to induce the American people to surrender to Lord Chaitanya by expansion of book distribution. That is wanted. When you come to that, that is success. Then you can take charge of the government. And as soon as in America, the Krishna conscious boys are in power, the whole world will be changed. The idea is to bring under control all the atheistic classes of men. There are two ways of bringing the opposition under control. One is by logic and philosophy. The other is by force. That was done by Bharat Maharaj when he was king of this planet." So Prabhupada had some future vision, you can say. Defeat them by logic, and if they won't accept that, then you can use force if you're in charge of the country. So let's see what happens. It seems, however, that not everyone in ISKCON appreciates the sacrifices of the Sankirtan devotees. Sometimes, Tamal Krishna said, some of the men, especially the book distributors, want to live separately from their wives because otherwise they get distracted from their service. But this then disturbs the women, and one or two of them want to divorce and remarry. Since this is against the principles of Vedic culture, he wondered whether or not it should be allowed. Prabhupada was not happy to hear this news. By his reaction, while Jagadish was reading the letter to him, he is not at all in agreement with this practice, but he knows that if he is too rigid in imposing every stricture, it will be difficult for many Western devotees to follow. He is strict, but also practical. While stating the standard in his reply, he also made it clear that he will not reject someone from the chance to engage in devotional service, even if he or she cannot follow all of our tenets. He replied, "Why the wife should be disturbed if she is living not in the association of her husband?" When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to East Bengal for preaching, his first wife was alone. Wife's duty is not to disturb the husband. That is the Vedic principle. The marriage relationship is not for sex. Of course, this is the way in this age. So such a wife may marry for the second time. What can be done? Vedic marriage is not for sex. Quite a heavy topic. So as Prabhupada was getting his massage and listening to the mail, Shruti Rupa cooked Srila Prabhupada's lunch. When he had finished, she came in to clear his plate and clean the eating place. She saw that some ants had already begun to feast on the remnants of on Prabhupada's remnants, and she was reminded of an incident in October in Vrindavan when Palika had gone into Prabhupada's rooms after he finished his lunch. Prabhupada had been sitting back, cleaning his teeth with a toothpick, and Palika had immediately begun to wipe the surface of his chonky, even though there were ants on them there. He had looked at her and he said, "It is best to kill as little as possible. If you simply tap the end of the table, then they will go away." This incident made a deep impression on Shruti Rupa. So now she started tapping the chonky as she wiped away the crumbs. Prabhupada was watching and asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm tapping so the ants will go away," she replied. With a sweep of his hand, Prabhupada said, "Simply wipe them away." Shruti Rupa was quite surprised, but she quickly realized that Prabhupada was not bound to act the same way in every circumstance. So at 5 p.m., the friendly and respectful Sriman Narayan came in a car to escort Prabhupada to the Gandhi ashram at Sevagram, a village about 5 miles away, in the opposite direction from Pune. This ashram was Gandhi's headquarters for almost 10 years and his main retreat. Whenever he felt too strained by politics, he would come to Sevagram and spend his time spinning cotton on a small wheel. As Prabhupada stepped out of the car at the ashram, he was garlanded in the traditional Gandhian fashion, not with flowers, but with a thick white loop of spun cotton thread. This was another means by which Gandhi propagated his idea of everyone spinning and weaving his own cloth in the simple and traditional self-sufficient style. Srila Prabhupada was escorted on a tour by Sriman Narayan, who, like many others present, was attired in a white khadi dhoti and kurta, a khadi sleeveless jacket, and a small white cotton cap pointed at the front and back, known popularly in the West as a Nehru hat, after Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister, who often wore one at public functions. The whole complex was originally Jamanlal Bajaj's property. He had turned it over to Gandhi in the early 1930s, and Gandhi for the first time in 1936 and the last time in 1946. The village was originally called Shigaon, but it was renamed Sevagram in 1940. In all, on and off, Gandhi spent about 7 years in residence there at the height of the independence movement. Sevagram was thus the center of action in the recent history of India, and nowadays various institutions dedicated to Gandhi and his wife, such as the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Medical Science and the Kasturba Health Society, have sprung up in the village. I was surprised not to see any flower beds or gardens around the complex. It turns out that when Gandhi first came here, the whole area was quite remote and difficult to access by road. Hemmed in by jungle, it was infested with snakes, and when the land was cleared, it was either gritted with fine pebbles or kept as bare earth in an effort to keep away the unwanted reptiles. There is still no electricity because Gandhi had apparently made a vow that he would not allow any electricity until every village in India also had it. So the complex is lit only with kerosene lamps. The accent is still on simple village life, and rural economic occupation, and the buildings with their mud brick walls and bamboo and red tiled roofs reflected this. We finally ended up at the small group of cottages where Gandhi himself had lived. His original residence was a one-room hut called Adi Nivas. It had been built by local villagers whom Gandhi had instructed not to spend more than 500 rupees. It is small and simple, with 2 feet thick mud walls, a smooth mud floor covered with woven cane mats, and a tiled roof. Water was drawn from a well, and Gandhi would bathe in a tin bath. When things got too busy due to political dealings, he moved with his wife Kasturba into a larger hut nearby, which became known as Bapu Kuti. When things got too busy, Kasturba was given a hut of her own called Ba Kuti, and another hut became Bapu's office with a telephone hotline to Delhi. So despite his attempts at simple living, politics were never far behind. Surrounding these huts are other similar ones, which were occupied by Gandhi's married followers. To live in the ashram, residents had to observe 11 strict codes of behavior: truth, non-violence, chastity, non-possession, non-stealing, bread labor, control of palate, fearlessness, equality of religion, Swadeshi, and removal of untouchability. So these were the 11 principles that they were living there. If you couldn't follow those, you couldn't live in the ashram. Prabhupada was invited to sit in the Bapu Kuti for a few minutes. It has a central room with Gandhi's seat and spinning wheel, and on 2 walls, a bas relief in mud of the Devanagari symbol for Om, flanked by palm trees. The mud floor is covered with bamboo matting, and the bamboo bookcase displays the Gita, Quran, Bible, Ramayana, and devotional songs of various saints. There is also an urn that bore Gandhi's ashes after his cremation, the ashes themselves having been put in the river Dam at Pune. Srila Prabhupada commented little. In truth, the whole place had a somber and lifeless mood. We also noted that, like Paramdam Ashram at Pune, despite the claim that it was all based on the Gita, there was not one single picture of Krishna anywhere, what to speak of a deity. There are rather signs throughout the complex displaying quotes from Gandhi. After a brief inspection of the rooms, Prabhupada was led outside to a central open area. Sectioned off by a low single rail fence, it is used for a daily ritual of meditation and prayer recital. So they had one area, let's say probably about 60 feet square, where everybody gathered in the evenings, and they had a daily ritual of meditation and prayer recital. A large sign at one end declares in Hindi and English, prayer ground. This is the place where Bapu, Mahatma Gandhi, used to hold prayers both morning and evening and shared his thoughts with those present. Quoting Gandhi, it should be a spacious ground underneath the open sky, available to the poorest of the poor. Daily prayer is still held on this ground. Another smaller sign announces, do not walk with shoes. It was by now dusk, and about 50 men and women with a few small children had gathered to sit in neat rows facing an asana which had formerly been used by Gandhi. To the accompaniment of the strums of a single veena, they all solemnly chanted some Buddhist mantras in Japanese. They observed 2 minutes silence, and they recited the last 19 verses of the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, followed by prayers from the Quran in Urdu, prayers from the Bible, then Zarathustra or Parsi, then devotional songs by Mirabai and Tulsi Das, and then Ram Dun, names of God. The session ended with a short reading from the Ramayana. It took about half an hour, and in comparison to our kirtans, it sounded, to me at least, funereal. Prabhupada sat quietly through the whole rendition, and at the end, he was asked to sign the visitor's book. He did so, and he wrote inside, "I was fortunate to come to the Gandhi Ashram Sevagram today. It is so quiet and serene. I have requested them to double entendre there. It's complimenting, it's so quiet and serene, but that for a devotee is death." So reading it out for all to hear, Prabhupada signed it with his familiar A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. If you go to the Gandhi Ashram nowadays, you'll find that visitor's book with Prabhupada's message in it is still there. But I went there some years back just to refresh my memory about things. And they showed me the book, but they actually keep it away, so it's not obviously clear. But on request, they showed me it. So just before Prabhupada got up to leave, Nirmala Ben, the wife of Gandhi's third son, Ramdas, came over and spoke a few friendly words. And she and Prabhupada enjoyed a pleasant 5-minute exchange. When it was time to leave, as Prabhupada went to step into the front seat of the waiting car, I held the door open for him. Turning to enter with his back first, Srila Prabhupada said, without irony and out loud to no one in particular, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi. A fitting observation and commentary on the visit. When we got back to his room, Prabhupada chatted for a while about the visit and said that they, the followers of Gandhi, can try to keep the tradition, but there is no life. So gradually the whole thing will become useless and finished. They are carrying out their rituals simply on the basis of some sentiment, and it will not survive. He noted as well that there were no young people in the place, only infants and middle-aged men and women who were old enough to remember Gandhi and still had some sentiment for him. Hare Krishna. So I'll stop at this point, and if anybody has any questions, comments, I'll be very happy to try to oblige you all. Let me just, yes. So Hare Krishna. My throat's going a little croaky, so I don't want to strain it too much. Do you have any comments, Sarvatma Prabhu, or questions from anybody?
I'll give precedence to Taraka Prabhu. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna. My humble obeisances to you, Prabhu. It's been a very long time since I've seen you. I wanted, first of all, to thank you very profusely for kindly...
Taraka Prabhu. Taraka Prabhu.
Yes.
There must be some other computer.
Okay.
It's
one
echo. You can turn off whatever.
How's that?
Much better. Thank you.
That's good now.
Okay, yes. I wanted to thank you for kindly engaging me in Srila Prabhupada's service in 76 and 77 while we were in India. You gave me a bunch of opportunities to render service directly to Srila Prabhupada, and that's been a great treasure for me in my life. So I have a tremendous debt of gratitude to you for your kindness in engaging me.
My pleasure.
I wanted, you mentioned early in your narration briefly, Srila Prabhupada's visit to Hyderabad, which I guess is going to comprise the first chapter of the sixth volume. I have been waiting for a very long time for this particular chapter because I was in Hyderabad during that time period, and it was it was a monumental event in my life, having the opportunity to accompany Srila Prabhupada on walks and rendering service to him regularly. I guarded his room at night. You will recall that around the time of during his September visit, he was awake for 5 days consecutively while he was preaching to various VIPs and so on. And I noticed that every night when you took rest, Srila Prabhupada immediately got up and began his translation. He wasn't really sleeping long at all. But I wanted to ask you particularly about anything that you might recall of Srila Prabhupada's instructions from the Hyderabad farm. Here at Gitanagari, we're trying to develop the project according to Srila Prabhupada's directions, trying to understand precisely what his vision was. There were a lot of very valuable instructions given in Hyderabad, in room conversations and in walks. I'm not sure there are any recordings of the walks on the farm.
Should be some.
Yeah, some of what I remember him discussing, I don't find in recordings. But I was curious to know whether there are any specific farm-related instructions that you recall from that time period.
Okay, well, there's lots actually, but that would take another section of the book. The visit to Hyderabad, well, the first visit that we had during the year was in August of '76. Prabhupada had just returned from his last world tour. And after a couple of days in Bombay, we flew down to Hyderabad, and Prabhupada oversaw the Janmastami Vyasa Puja ceremony, the installation of the deities there. And he spent about another week or so after that just helping Mahamsa to get organized and making sure that some basic minimum standards were kept in, with the looking after the new deities, etc. So after that, Radhastami was at the end of August. Prabhupada went back to Delhi for that. We had 3 months in Vrindavan. And then the 1st or 2nd of December, we flew down again to Hyderabad because Mahamsa had just finalized the creation of a new trust, which would be kind of jointly held by ISKCON members and by the family, the Badrukas, who gave the land to ISKCON. That became a whole separate issue in itself after Prabhupada left. But at least at this point, Prabhupada was keen to kick off the Varnashram system. I mentioned that when he was getting in the car to go down to Hyderabad, then he made that comment that now we're going to start a new phase of this movement. And Jagadish asked, what is that? And Prabhupada said, Varnashram. So he was keen for that. He saw an opportunity with the land to try to give it a kickoff. We spent a few days in Hyderabad city, and then we went out to the farm. So just very, very, very briefly, 560 acres. Prabhupada noted that the neighbors that we had were all farmers. So he wanted to start a program whereby every evening we would have a pandal small one. Then we would have like a 5 or 10 minute talk, and then there would be distribution of sumptuous prasadam, and that was it. Then eventually, as the local people became attracted, they get purified to a certain point by hearing the chanting and taking prasadam, and then they would want to become devotees themselves. So at that point, Prabhupada said we could give them an acre of land, and you make these hamlets, groupings of small houses, maybe a dozen in different places around the land. And each grouping of houses would have a small central temple. Any Vishnu Tattva deity, Prabhupada said, because they like Balaji down there. So he said it can be Balaji, it can be Lakshmi Narayan, it can be Krishna, Radha Krishna, etc. So with that at the center point, then the idea was that the inhabitants would get up early in the morning, go to Mangalarati, do a little chanting, and then they go out for the day to look after their land. Then in the evening, when the work was done, they would come back, freshen up, and then gather again for prasadam and more chanting. That was it. That was Prabhupada's Varnashram system. Time, place, and circumstance, of course. How you would transplant that into, 21st century materialistic society. It would obviously going to take a lot of effort to realize that. And even the simple program that Prabhupada set up there, within about a few weeks, somehow or another it disintegrated. They started just having the prasadam distribution 1 day a week. And there was dissent between the leaders there. That was Mahamsa, Hansadutta, and Tejas Prabhu. They couldn't get along together. So they found it very difficult to implement what Prabhupada had desired. And then, unfortunately, after Prabhupada left the planet, maybe a year or two later, then the Badruka family became kind of disgusted with the dealings of our devotees. So they initiated some kind of legal action to take back the trust. As it stands now, we have about 40 or 50 acres. That's it. The devotees have installed Krishna and Balaram there, and there's some farming going on, but it's very, very small. It's a lot different from, I think, the way that Prabhupada envisioned it. But that instruction is still there. Prabhupada said in 77 that only 50% of my work is done. You still have to do Varnashram. So that's something, if we can't do it, then we have to at least instill in the next generation the desire and enthusiasm so that they can do it. At some point or another, we're going to have to return to a simpler way of life. And personally, I think the problem is that we're all addicted to luxury. Yeah, if you live in this village style, as that description of, Prabhupada said if Gandhi had one good idea, it was this idea of, remaining on the land and just, with simple facilities. He very much liked that village idea. So Prabhupada also supported that, although obviously for other reasons he didn't like Gandhi's preaching, so-called preaching. But it's something that I think has been left alone for quite a while now. And there's been always, over the years, at least, there's been lots of discussion about Varnashram, but very few people are doing it practically. Maybe a few places like Hungary, they're growing their own food, at least 80% of it. So something's going on, but it's not anywhere near what Srila Prabhupada envisioned, I think. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you very much.
Taraka Prabhu,
Another question?
Yes, Taraka Prabhu, perhaps you can mute yourself. Thank you. If nobody else has a question, I do have a couple questions. First of all, Prabhupada barely slept, and he preached to his last breath. So how, even though you were young, how did you keep up? Because I know it must have been totally exhausting. Most of his servants or secretaries or people who went with his entourage, they did it for weeks. You did it for years. So how did you manage? Were you going crazy?
No, I enjoyed it. To me, I mean, that was the perfection of life, is just to be with Prabhupada. So I always found it very, I wouldn't say easy, but I always found it to be very natural to be with Srila Prabhupada. Hari Kesh, on the other hand, he once told me that whenever he went in front of Prabhupada, he was always a little apprehensive. And so he said, I envy you because you have such a easy friendship, almost like a friendship with Srila Prabhupada. I just love being there. But the fact is that Prabhupada was on such an exalted platform. It was definitely a struggle to keep up with him and to maintain a level of service that was required for Srila Prabhupada. So after about nearly a year and a half, when we got back to Mayapur in February of 77, that was, of course, when Prabhupada was getting very, very sick, very weak. And just before the festival began there, he came down with a very high fever. So he was not able to participate in any of the programs. So at that point, I had had a year and a half, and I was starting to feel a little, let's say, jaded or routine. I was very well aware of the problems that some devotees had had, from being too close to Prabhupada, or, familiarity breeds contempt. So a number of servants and secretaries had fallen down after being with Prabhupada. And I was, quite aware of that. So when I found myself becoming inattentive, small things, not big things, but still, I missed doing something, or I did something that wasn't supposed to be done, I could understand my time, or at least I got a strong feeling that my time as Prabhupada's servant was coming to an end. At the same time, Tamal Krishna Maharaj came in. He told me, he confided in me that he was giving up all of his other services, which were not inconsiderable, New York and the East Coast there, and especially Radha Damodar traveling book party. He said, I spent 8 years out in the field because I felt that was the best way to serve Prabhupada. But now actually I'm going to give up all my other service just so that I can be with Prabhupada as his secretary for however long he has left on the planet. He said, I don't care whether it's 1 year or 10 years, but I just want to be with Prabhupada now. I feel that need. So he was feeling the need to come onto the party. I had already started to feel the need to leave. Wasn't exactly a need, but I felt the impulse was, that my time as servant was coming to an end. I was aware of that. And so I talked with Prabhupada about it. I told him I don't want to commit any offenses. I'm getting a little slack, so I'd like to take a break. So when I told him that I don't want to commit any offenses, his eyes opened up. He said, yes, very good. So it was my choice to leave the party, but I don't think that I had a choice. I think Krishna, had another arrangement in mind. I had my opportunity, let's put it that way. So I took as much advantage of it as I could. And I just, tried to do the best that I could. And I think Prabhupada was pleased with that.
Did you feel that Prabhupada treated you differently?
No, Prabhupada's dealings were the same with everybody. And I also saw that, being Prabhupada's servant, I got to sit in on a lot of meetings. There was so many letters, mail was coming in. I would hear that being read to Prabhupada every day and see his replies. So I learned a lot of stuff there, being with Prabhupada. What was the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, if you think that Prabhupada treated you differently, the way he
Yeah. We got the same treatment. And in fact, whenever sannyasis or big leaders came to see Prabhupada, he would expect the servant to facilitate them. He would treat them with, the visitors with great respect, of course, if there were sannyasis. So he would give them that recognition as a sannyasi. But in the all-round picture, the servant, the secretary, we were all on the same level, let's say, in terms of our relationship with Srila Prabhupada. So I don't think that Prabhupada had, well, I remember one time in about a year after I joined Prabhupada's party, we were in Vrindavan, Srila Hari Prabhu was there, and we were old friends. So he made a comment to me to the effect that I think that you must be one of Prabhupada's favorite devotees or sons. So I told him Prabhupada doesn't have favorites. He's equal with everybody. So whatever opportunity that we get, if I do it or you do it, for Prabhupada, it was all the, done in the same mood and effort. So I don't think that there was anything special. It was just a question of, doing your best that you could. And Prabhupada did recognize that. He always said that service should be recognized. So when I left his party, it's a long story, but he sent me back to Australia as the GBC there. First of all, he made me his ad hoc representative. Then after a month, he made me a GBC. So Prabhupada recognized, the efforts of the devotees and tried to, if you want to use the word reward, that reward would be that you got the chance to do more service. So Prabhupada expected from me, at least I can say, that I'd had a year and a half training. Now it was time to go out and put it to some good use, which I did. And that was, he told me personally that he was happy with what I was doing. So
I remember we were having breakfast in Sweden during a festival, and I asked you an embarrassing question. I don't know if I should ask it again, but just because this is historical, I think you should indulge us. I asked you if you ever committed a blunder in your service, and you told me a story. Would you mind repeating it?
Well, it depends on which blunder you're referring to. There were quite a few of them.
Well, you locked Prabhupada out.
Yes, I was just giving a class this morning at the Gurukul here, and I told them that story, how I locked Prabhupada on the roof in Vrindavan. I mean, that was probably one of the worst offenses that I made. I was, in brief, a couple of devotees had come from Australia. I knew them. I wanted to talk with them. So when Prabhupada took his morning rest after breakfast, instead of staying up on the roof with him, actually the devotees had installed a new buzzer. So if Prabhupada was upstairs, he could just press the buzzer, and we would hear it downstairs and come up and see what he wanted. So I thought, well, now the buzzer's there, I don't have to stay on the roof. I'll go down and see my friends. So we're talking and talking, and time's going on, and I was thinking, wow, Prabhupada's really resting a long time this morning. And maybe there's this voice in the back of your head, go and see what's happening, go to Prabhupada. And I thought, something's not quite right here. And then at that moment, this German devotee, Maharati, he came. He was staying in the guest house, and his room overlooked Prabhupada's roof. So he had looked out the window, hoping to see Prabhupada was there, and he was. But Prabhupada waved to him and he told him, "Get Hari Sauri, the door's locked." So he came running down the stairs, "Hari Sauri, Hari Sauri, Prabhupada's locked on the roof." As soon as I saw him, I knew immediately what I'd done. I'd gone in, I had escorted Prabhupada onto the roof, through the room that's there, onto the back roof. And then when I left him on the back roof to rest in the sunshine, I had come into the room again and I slid the bolt without thinking, and I locked it from the inside. Even as I was doing that, I was thinking, now if Prabhupada needs me, he can just ring the buzzer. But the buzzer was inside the room and he was locked on the back portion. So Maharati came, I ran up the steps, I opened the door. Prabhupada was standing there. There was a screen door and he was just standing there. And when I came in, normally we would when you came into Prabhupada's room, either he came to see you or you to him, we would offer our obeisances. That time I didn't. I just get the door open as quickly as I can. So I unlocked it. Prabhupada was on the other side of the screen door. He said, "You rascal." He said, "I've been waiting here for an hour." And then that was it. He walked off, went downstairs. So I was completely mortified, obviously. I apologized, and Prabhupada said, "All right, don't do it again." And then it was time for massage. So during the massage, I felt like I had this heavy, heavy black cloud over my head, just hanging down on me, even though I'd, said I was sorry. But somehow or another, I could feel the offense was still there. So at the end of the massage, I made a decision on what I should do to rectify it. Prabhupada had his bath, he had his lunch, then he went back upstairs, and there was a rocking chair on the veranda of the roof there. So Prabhupada, as soon as he sat down in his rocking chair, then I came forward, I offered my full length dandavats, and as humbly and as, meaningfully as I could, I apologized. I said, "Prabhupada, I'm really sorry. I'll never ever do anything like that again." So when I finished, Prabhupada looked at me and he smiled, this really big smile. And then this cloud it was gone. It just lifted. As soon as Prabhupada smiled, that was it. It was gone. And then things were back to normal. So that was one, probably the worst blunder that I made. There were a couple of other times when I got really chastised, but that was the main one.
When Prabhupada chastised you, you feel your spiritual life was over, that you were no longer valuable member of the society? How did it
No, I
affect?
felt exactly the opposite. In Calcutta in '77, I got in some kind of a verbal exchange with one of the devotees that was also traveling with Prabhupada's party. And I started yelling at him. His name was Akshaya. So I started yelling at him. And Prabhupada was in his room. He had to send Gargamuni Swami out to tell me to shut up. So I was kind of in the modes. It was just one of those things, where your brain becomes dull from the mode of passion. And in the evening, Prabhupada rang the bell. I went into his room. This is in the Calcutta temple, the same place we still have. And Prabhupada had his almirah was open. This is like a steel cabinet. And there was some cardboard files. So Prabhupada, when I came in, he said, "Just pass me that red file." So I looked in the cabinet and I couldn't see a red file. So I said, "Prabhupada, there's no red file here." So without looking at me, Prabhupada said, pass me the red file. So there was one file, it was kind of like a purpley kind of color. I didn't think it was red, but it was kind of like a purpley color. And so I thought, maybe that's one. And I thought, no, this is not red. So I repeated that. I said, but Prabhupada, there is no red file. So that was it. Prabhupada exploded, and I mean, really exploded. He yelled at me. So he said, you become very expert at defending yourself. And he really, dressed me down for the next couple of minutes. I mean, when you get shouted at by Prabhupada, you know it. So when I went out of the room, Satsvarup Maharaj, who was the secretary, he was just coming in, and he looked at me. He said, "What happened to you?" So the shock of Prabhupada blasting me at the top of his voice, I mean, it really hit me down to the roots, And even he could see, Satsvarup, when he came in, something monumental had happened, I guess you'd call that. And I said, "Well, Prabhupada just blasted me." Oh, okay. But that was it. What the effect it had on me was that it knocked all my false ego out, stripped me down to the bare, condition. And after that, he never mentioned another word. And I was able to clear my mind and focus again. So it was a big help, but it was quite heavy. And interestingly enough, a couple of days later, Prabhupada just mentioned to me whilst I was doing his massage, he said, unless one is advanced, he cannot be chastised. Because if you chastise somebody who's not advanced, he said they'll crack and go away. So that was.
So now everything you see that is purple, you call red. It was actually the purple file that he was asking for.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, all the other files were either green or yellow or some color. This was the only one that had a hint of redness in it. But that was one of the incidences that, led me a couple of weeks later, whilst we were in Mayapur, led me to, to decide that things are starting to get a bit risky. I'm getting inattentive, and I'm not doing my service properly. So that made me feel that I should have at least a break, if not another service.
In retrospect, would you still do the same thing if it happened today?
No, I mean, they say history repeats itself. I'm sure I've done lots of worse things than that since Prabhupada's departure, but that's a whole different scenario. With Prabhupada, these things happen sometimes. And I found that the only thing that really gave me any protection, because, they say that the deities and the spiritual masters should be kept at a distance. Yeah, and if you, it's like with the fire, if you get too close to the fire, you get burnt. So if you can't stand the heat, then, you should separate yourself from the situation. So it is a fact that, you get a chance to make some real, maybe extra progress, if you like, by doing that personal service. But if you do it wrong, then you also get the reactions for it as well.
But
so
you were never becoming familiar with Prabhupada.
Well, I tried not to be. There were actually, a couple of secretaries on before me, where I saw that very clearly they had, that familiarity. They'd not been careful enough to maintain the distance, and as a result of that, they had problems later on. There was one incident actually just after the Calcutta incident. We'd gone to Mayapur, and then we got invited to, Prabhupada got invited to Mahesh Pandit's Samadhi, and he did a program there. And I knew that Prabhupada was very sick and didn't really have the strength to do any more programs. There were also at least 4 or 5 sannyasis in Mayapur at that time who could have easily gone there and done the program. And so this gentleman came, he was the pujari for Mahesh Pandit's Samadhi. He came and he requested Prabhupada directly to come and do a program at his temple. So Prabhupada had agreed. So when he left, I was kind of disturbed that Prabhupada was being called to do this program. So I asked Prabhupada, why do you have to do it? We have so many sannyasis. So Prabhupada said, no, but that means he's asked me directly. And so I have to go. So
You and your meeting?
yes. After lunch, I went into Prabhupada's room. My mind was still disturbed. And I tried to kind of force the issue a little bit. And as soon as I did that, then Prabhupada immediately, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, he put his finger up and stopped me. He said, so I understood I'd gone too far. I was only thinking of Prabhupada's welfare, but the way that I went about it was that I tried to push Srila Prabhupada to agree. But Prabhupada had already made his mind up, and I should have been aware of that and not pushed. So that was an instance, I think, where I transgressed the relationship between the guru and the disciple to some extent, because I pushed Prabhupada further than I should have made my point. So yeah, I was aware of that. And that was another factor in, my making the decision not to continue on as a servant. Apparently, somebody's waiting to see me.
Okay. Well, in my name and in the name of all the devotees in Gita Nagari and surrounding areas and everybody tuning in, I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Matter of fact, I will even invite the devotees to unmute themselves and do it personally for your kind participation and delivery.
Well, thank you all very much for inviting me. It's a great
Hare
pleasure.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Prabhu, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank you
Krishna.
so
We'll
much.
do it again.
Thank you so much.
Hari Krishna.
Thank you very
Hare
much, Hari
Krishna.
Sauri
Srila
Prabhu.
Prabhupada.
Hare
Ki
Krishna.
Jai.
Please
Krishna.
accept my
Krishna.
humble obeisances. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Haribo.
So devotees, stay tuned. We have a busy week. Tomorrow, Banu Swami is going to give Bhagavatam class. And then Monday, yours truly. So you can tune out of that one. And the day after, Jayadvaita Swami is going to speak at 6:30 in the afternoon. You will get a note in the communications WhatsApp group. Thank you very much for your participation and see you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.